All right. So, welcome, guys, to today's session. Today, we are looking at my last chapter to present, which is chapter three. And what is happening in that chapter is that we are going to be looking at um, examining the um, here we go. We're going to be looking at examining the relational leadership model that is the predominant model that this text is um, well, I should say the model that this text prefers in terms of developing leadership. All right. So it is designed to offer you an option to choose one that might be a little bit realistic, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So let's start by looking at how the model is presented, and we'll work through it. All right. Jalissa is coming back in. Hi, Jalissa, welcome back. All right. So, first of all, as the name would suggest, the relational leadership model is one that focuses on the relationship that leaders have with followers and vice versa, and that they are seeing that leadership is inherently about focusing on the relationship and the way in which we work with each other. As we spoke about before, um, there's a lot of positive elements based upon the nature of the relationship that we could draw between people we've worked with in the past, with whom we've had good relationships with, and the nature of the interactions that we've had across the board. Um, okay, we have Alexandra coming back in, I believe. Yes, Miss Samaru. All right, welcome back. Okay. The other element is that leadership is dependent upon the context. So we spoke about this before in previous elements that this has to be taken into account. The two elements here would be the context in which the leadership exercise is taking place, or the um, all right, Andera. That would be Miss Sanchez, I believe. Welcome. All right. Okay. So the two elements, the relationship is important, or focus in terms of the model, as well as the context in which it's taking place, because we spoke about this before. The nature, the way you go about exercising leadership in different contexts or different situations will vary. We don't expect that we have certain types of behaviors in a classroom setting as opposed to a more social oriented setting. So we're going to see differences in that, as opposed to also the business setting. You might have a different type of leaderships, actions and activities that you get up to. So just a reminder of the definition of leadership is seen as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now, notice the focus on positive change being the end result. Positive change as measured through which lens will determine as well, based upon the activities that we get up to. Miss Llewellyn, welcome back. Um, so we're going to be, paying attention to that. So we always remembered from the very definition, the relational leadership model is about that relationship, and the relationship is couched within positive outcomes and ethical processes. So we're going to be looking at that across the board. So the relational leadership model focuses on five components: purpose, inclusivity, empowerment, ethical behavior, and process orientation. So the statement here, RLM, is, and this is the abbreviation we're using, RLM, the relational leadership model is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of views, empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. All right. Marcelo, welcome. All right. Okay. So we're going to start examining the model from these five components that we're going to be looking at here. So this is a visual representation of the process of the relational leadership model. So we could see that the purpose is central to the entire um, model, with inclusivity, empowerment, and ethical behavior being intersections, and all encompassed around a process-oriented approach. So we'll start to examine the model from it. So the first thing we want to start to say is that this is not um, the model is not designed to evaluate current leadership practices, but it tries to put forward an opportunity for a model that can possibly replace what is currently practiced or for us to aspire towards. Again, we are creating an ideal model against which we will be able to measure the reality around us. And hopefully we could start to see where the gaps exist. We can adjust and try to move towards the objectives of the model. All right. So let's start to look at the first aspect, purpose. Purpose. When we identify what our goals are, what our vision is, that drives our behavior, what we do to get it. So most of us here have been asked, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Where do you see yourself in the next 10 years? Have you all ever been asked that question, especially in interviews, or if you've done any sort of mock interviews, or have you been asked that question during when you were making decisions about your selection of subjects? Any of you all ever tried tackling that question? Where do you see yourself?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in what context?
Um, I had a job interview and they asked me where do I see myself
Now, how?
taking my career in 10 years.
Right. So, how did you answer that? If you don't,
I
if you
told
don't mind
them,
sharing.
yeah, no, that's okay. I'm a graphic designer, so I told them I would see myself pursuing it academically to PhD level and also starting my own business.
All right. Those are two huge things there, though. Did they ask you to specify anything, the specific goals that you would try to look for within that time frame?
Uh, no, the only thing that they asked me was to expand on what type of business exactly I was looking to open.
Right. Okay. And what type of business was that?
A media house.
Wow, that's even bigger. Wow, that's a lot of capital you have to get organized there. All right, cool. All right, but I guess they were. Did they hire you at the end of the day?
No, I was too young for what they were looking for.
But that's still, you're aspiring towards something good. So that's something. Anybody else had? Uh, you must have tackled this question though. I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years time? You know, you must have in your mind. I'm pretty certain most of you all have some idea of what you would like to do with yourself by now. I mean, the I know when I was younger, at your age, I would, in my, late teens, early 20s, that type of stuff. For those of you in that age bracket, that was a major focus point of, where you're going to find yourself in the future, and what you would hope to do and what you would hope to accomplish. What are some of the things that you guys think you have? Miss Ramdan, for example, would you be willing to share? No? Okay. All right. So it seems like we're not hearing you. Um, that sucks. What about Christian?
I would really say just, well, I'm a graphic designer as well, so
right?
uh, really want more experience in the field. Um,
No, but what I'm
expand
asking
into.
about, what are the ultimate goals that you have in terms of where you see your life in the future? And I'm not talking just like
Well,
the next 5 years. I'm thinking, are you seeing your own home? Are you seeing a family? What are you seeing for yourself?
oh, um,
Or you haven't started to think
I,
that
I
direction yet?
guess I haven't thought like 10 years, but I guess 5 years I would want to start my own business. Yeah.
All right. So they you have some. Okay, cool. That makes sense. All right. Right. So based upon what goals you set up and where you see yourself in the future, you're going to find that your actions are going to start to, and your decisions will drive towards that particular vision that you have for yourself. So let's really talk about it. So the concept here is that purpose influences the actions of individuals. Similarly, in leadership, the purpose of an organization drives the way in which the leaders and followers, the people who make up the organization, will begin to act towards getting what they want to do. So, purpose influences the components of being inclusive, empowering, and ethical. It includes others, empowers them to use their leadership and talents, and is ethical in that it benefits others and improves the quality of life. How that purpose is achieved is just as important as the outcome or the goal that we're looking at. So, in most instances, good organizations and good leaders are vision driven and not position driven. Now, what does that mean? A vision driven organization is one that identifies a place they want to be, much like yourselves, a goal that you want to achieve at the end of the day, some vision that you have of the future, be it near future or distant future, and that drives your actions and decisions in today's environment. It is not position driven, meaning that it is not the individual who sits in the leadership position that drives the organization, but the vision that was created for the organization that drives it. Now, this is important because if we are position driven, there's a tendency in the absence of the individual, the vision will falter. The whatever goals would disappear because it was not driven by a commonality of ideas, but more just the individual who sits at the helm. This is often the situation, and for those of you who have um, ideas of developing your own personal businesses and running your stuff, is that you're likely to probably start off with position driven goals and objectives. If you were to leave the organization, either willingly or unwillingly, that will change because you're no longer there to drive the organization towards that particular goal. Whereas if it was vision driven and everybody bought into that vision, meaning everybody agreed with it, in the absence of the individual who was at the helm, it means that we still have the vision that we shared at the beginning to continue moving through. This happens a lot in family oriented businesses where they're developed out of historically getting into business activities and growing a business very slowly over time, and the persons at the helm of the business, which tends to be the parents of children that they have later on during the process, they have a particular vision of where they would like to go, the level of growth they want to engage in, the kind of activities they want to get into. But if they were to die, or when they die, as is likely with everybody, um, the vision then begins to falter because the drive for the organization's position was not something that was determined collectively, but was something determined by that individual sitting in position. So that's the danger of an organization being position driven. Um, um, and the 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 overall guideline should be in the relational leadership model is that organizations should be really vision driven, and how we arrive at that vision is also going to be really important. So arriving at that position of the purpose that we want to get into, we have to revert back to that activity that we spoke about before. Ms. Philip Williams, welcome.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. We have to harken back to those things that we spoke about, the knowing, being, doing elements that we spoke about in the first presentation. Individuals need to know themselves before they can effectively work with others to influence change or achieve common goods. And the process of getting to know yourself starts with the knowing, being, doing activity, which is knowing is understanding all that you can about yourself, knowing who you are and how other people view you, being aware of others, that is working with other people, how are you with other people, and then acting across the board. The three components are interrelated. The knowledge you possess influences the part of the knowing element. Your beliefs and your values is going to determine your doing element, or a combination of those two. And that pattern of development is circular, and I actually prefer the word spiraling rather than circular, because circular simply indicates that we keep on going around the same equidistant place. But if we spiral, we could either spiral outwards, um, or spiral inwards. Generally, the objective will be to spiral outwards, meaning that our circle and our begins to get bigger and bigger. And what that means is that our perspective grows over time, if you think about it from that particular element. And that we're not on a linear approach to things where we're just moving in a straight line, but we're taking into consideration all of the things around us that are influencing our decision making, our behaviors, and we are aware of it, and our perception of them is improving over time. All right, that knowledge based stuff. Palmer uses and again, here we come back to the metaphor of heart, head, and practice. And he used this in the context of describing effective teaching. So he spoke about this because, and hopefully this might resonate with you, that the heart and the head refers to the knowing. Well, of course, the head refers to the knowing. The heart is the being, which is your value, your behavior, and the doing is the practice part of the situation, because you keep on doing things. Now, if you think about this from your experiences, either as teachers or as students, you will understand that those teachers who prove to be best for us in the past would be those that have really good understanding of their information, the knowing. Their knowledge is deep, and they are always inquisitive in terms of learning more about the topics that they are teaching. They are invested in the teaching process. They they enjoy the teaching process, more importantly, and they like their students, and in fact love the practice of teaching. And more important, that exhibits itself in the way in which they do things. So the connection there is really an important element. So the same knowing, being, doing, heart, head, and practice. So I find that analogy is really a nice one. And he argues that the all three of these components is the same that is applicable to teaching, is the same that will be applicable to leadership. Because if we remember, we talk about, leadership having, the intelligence, but yet the acceptability and caring for other people, to be able to work successfully with others. That's the being part, and that influences our practice, how we do things, and how we engage with people. That's going to be something really important across the board. So, coming out from that, the observations being made, people will collaborate with those people who are credible, and those people are knowing. So, why? What credibility refers to somebody who can demonstrate their understanding and, as they talk about here, competence in the field that they're operating in. So you can't be a leader necessarily in a field in which you have absolutely no knowledge about. That's the head element that we keep on talking about. So if you're not an expert in a particular field, but you have been selected to lead in it, you have to find yourself, you have to find a way to become extremely knowledgeable in that area. In fact, most leaders don't arrive in those situations without developing or illustrating a high level of competence in the field that they're operating in. It could be graphic arts, it could be radiology, it could be management studies, it could be any area, as long as they have what we refer to as responsible knowledge or responsible information, that they are coming from a place of understanding and knowing. All right. And if you have gaps, you fill those gaps in with your own personal research and development and training, as the case might be necessary. So people will trust you more if you know if you know what you do. I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked with somebody or anybody um, who honestly did not wasn't comfortable with with the information that they're actually trying to dispense, or the organization that they were running. That's a really problematic thing, because there are a lot of what we might call posers that exist out there, who they don't really necessarily know, or they're not really qualified in their field, but they're trying to lead and run organizations, and it the cracks begin to show very rapidly, especially when they are confronted by other individuals within the organization who will know that this person is posing. All right, they're pretending to know things. uh, I remember seeing this clip from this comedian from South Africa. Anybody is familiar with him? um, oh god, he was on the Daily Show. um, Name's escaping me right now. um, he he recently left, but he had a skit he did about a gentleman called Yancy in South Africa, who was the official interpreter for the president of South Africa. W- The problem is that Yancy probably only knew a little bit of sign language and faked everything else. And it was discovered during a state visit by by President Obama to South Africa, um, when he was doing um, the sign language for the President of the United States, and the international audience was looking at what he was doing and realized he was doing absolute nonsense. But he was, for years, he was the lead um, closed caption signer for for the thing. And what happened was, they had analyzed what he was actually doing, and he kept on using a couple of similar phrases in sign language that he kept on using over and over again, and adding other sorts of different movements. And this is what I'm talking about. Initially, people believed that, well, of course, on people who didn't know the field of sign language, didn't didn't know that he was faking it. And of course, now it got an international audience, and people in the international audience saying, "What rubbish is this? What is he signing?" And it create. You could imagine for how embarrassing that would have been for the South African government, to have their chief sign language person proven to be a liar and a cheat in front of the entire international environment. You could imagine that how horrible that would have been. I don't know whatever happened to this Yancy character. Since then, obviously he was fired. So at least from that particular job. I don't know what would have happened. So it means that as a leader, regardless of what field you're in, you have to demonstrate some competence in order to, gain the respect of other people around you. There are four particular levels of competency that you need to develop. I'll start with the one in the middle here, technical skills. This is the expertise that we're talking about that you need to have in order to be an expert in the field. All right. And we'll go up to the top one, interpersonal skills, meaning that you have developed a set of skills that make you an effective communicator. And we spoke about how problematic that can be for some of us, because of our unwillingness to be open to other people and stuff, and pausing our frame of reference to be able to listen effectively to what somebody else is saying or what they're actually trying to communicate. We spoke about that already. Conceptualization skills, there are challenges with this as well, simply because a lot of our education system kind of squashes creative thinking. And the last one, tactical skills. This is the ability to engage in negotiations, successful negotiations, without resorting to shouting matches and fist fights, and developing the other human relational behaviors and skills to work through collaboration and group work, that type of stuff that we're talking about. So those are really the skill set that you need to have as a leader. The easiest to accomplish is, in fact, the technical skills, because you can go to school, you can get your degree in the area, you could, develop the experiential learning in, practicing in the area and so on. The more difficult ones would tend to be the interpersonal and the tactical skills, because those are what we refer to as soft skills. In fact, um, one of the key engineers, Professor Julian, talked about this in Trinidad here. He's passed away since, and he spoke about the problem in the petrochemical industry was not technical skills, but what he referred to as soft skills. Those were where he felt the engineering departments were falling flat, because they focus so much of their attention on the development of the technical skills in engineering, be it in petrochemicals or chemical engineering or whatever. The area, their technical skills were really high, but their ability to work with others, to communicate effectively, and to think creatively, these were the skills that he found was seriously lacking, and which is one of the reasons why most people, when they do a specialization studies, like we have a number of specialization areas going on here. We have graphic artists, we have radiology. Those are your primary technical skills, but you'd realize in the degree that we've developed, you are a lot of you all might feel forced into having to do other bits and pieces of training, communications, mathematics, or you're forced to work in groups all the time. You'll make the connection there between what I'm talking about and what we speaking about here. How many of y'all hate group work? You could put a show of hands up. You don't have to open your mic. And why do we hate? So Stefan, why do you hate group work?
Well, for me, so I would say is it sometimes fall on one person to do majority of things.
Why?
I think there isn't enough. No one takes responsibility of the leader role to actually enforce certain things to get everything done.
Uh huh. Okay. Alim, would you concur with what Stefan is saying?
Yes, I think he's correct.
Okay. So as a result, there is a unit that we're going to be presenting a chapter on group working in teams and groups. But why do you think the college insists on giving you so much group work? Alim, your hand's still up, so go ahead. Tell me.
Oh, yeah. So well, the reason they would give us group work is because these are things we have to do when we actually work
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace. You would have to
Mm-hmm.
work together with your coworkers. You can't just keep to yourself all the time.
Right. What's your degree specialization, Aline?
IT.
Right. And IT, I mean, you could get yourself because a lot of people view in IT, these people working in dark rooms all by themselves, programming and writing script and stuff like that. But in fact, you have to spend a lot of time working with each other, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. And so therefore it's important that as part of your tactical skills you develop proper communication, which is why the college insists that although you are doing what we call some sort of degree specialization, you need to become skilled with these other things, which is why we emphasize effective communication, group work, creativity. Those tactical. Those are the as Professor Julian spoke about. Those are the hardest skills to develop because it depends upon you developing the knowledge and the know-how, and then acting upon it and keeping practice with it because you could lose practice of everything because if you don't put your skills to work is you kind of use it or lose it kind of situation. All right. Okay, so the being element, we spoke about this before in the last time. This has to do with who you are and your value structure, and it gives you the kind of concept of the the individual that you are. Are you are you somebody who would cheat? Are you somebody who will focus on we have to achieve this regardless of what else has to be done? We don't look at consequences. What are you? Your being element is the values that you hold there, and we talked about this. And when times get hard, how you behave is going to be critical. In the model that we're talking about here, we are the relational leadership model is emphasizing the need for your values to be the type of values as a leader that everybody would be able to work with you and that you are morally correct in your decision making. Now, there are some inherent issues with that. We'll deal with it when we get to the ethical part, and we'll develop it there from there. But it means that this is the sort of framework that you're working from. You have your technical skills, your knowledge base, which would include all your communication styles and whatnot, but you're governed by your value structure. If you value decency, if you value respecting other people's point of view and so on, you will behave in that manner. But if you perceive yourself as being the sole arbitrator of situations and you believe your word is the law, then you're going to behave in that manner. And that, as a result, that being element is going to be pervasive across all the decisions that you make. And I've come across people like that. I've worked with people who believe that their point of view was the only point of view until they start to meet other people around them, and it creates a lot of conflict. Because if you approach everything from that perspective, that you are an expert in the field, and you know better than everybody else how they ought to do this and how people should be doing this and that kind of stuff. And if you have that attitude all the time that you're always right, you always know what's going on, you're sitting on this moral high ground, but you're unwilling to listen to people, then you're going to find yourself being pretty lonely after a while because other people begin to leave or walk away from that situation. And it creates some serious consequences for you in the long run as a leader. All right. So you need to know who you are, you need to know your values. Okay. This is an important development that you're doing. And of course, the doing part is putting these things into action and going through the process over and over again because you are not, what's the word I want to use? You're not something cast in stone. We are all, until we die. And I can't say that for certain because I didn't die and come back, so I don't know what happens when this body expires. We are constantly learning. We are constantly reshaping who we are. We are in a constant process of evolving. So that doing part means that we are constantly revising our information, our knowledge, the experiences that we have that feed into our technical abilities. We are evolving our value structures. It is changing in our society because we realize that some values change over time. Because, I mean, in the past, there were certain things that were considered um, politically correct or appropriate behaviors that are no longer acceptable in current society as being acceptable forms of behavior and actions. Certain things we can't say anymore that was probably spoken about or used very loosely in the past and acceptable as regular behavior. All right. So that doing part is an ongoing process that keeps on changing us. And as I said, as long as you're alive, you have to keep that process going over and over again. So the doing part is obviously going to also reflect on what we know and what we believe. And it's always going to show everybody around you. That whole process is going to show everybody your knowledge base and your values base. It's going to show everything all the time. That's why we need to spend time getting involved with this. By the way, speaking of that, how many people have already started working on their self assessments? I'll tell you hold off on starting any sort of heavy writing until chapters 3 and 4 go off. Understanding self and understanding others. But anybody made a start? Even just sign up a page and save a file? No, nobody. All right.
So just the two questions we had to answer from the beginning, and that's it.
Well, there's only one question actually. That's not the self-assessment. That's actually the reflections. It's one question, right? What two questions you talking about?
Oh yes, I think it was one question.
It's one question. Yeah. What
Sorry.
are your expectations of yourself, your lecturer, and the program or the course
Right.
before we begin? Hopefully everybody responded and has done that question and saved it. Waiting for us to get to the end to go and do the reflections after the fact. All right. So um, there's a problem sometimes that some leaders run into, and that is a sort of leadership of leaders get stuck not taking actions because of a fixation on perfection. That indecisiveness is damaging to organizations and oftentimes reflects the inability for making mistakes, which is dangerous. I've actually had leaders like this in the past, and it causes organizations to come to a dead stop. And if an organization comes to a dead stop, they become irrelevant very quickly, especially in our current environment where things are marching on really fast. Now, how would somebody end up coming up or getting fixated on this perfection thing? It has to do with fear of failure. And the reason for that is because in the past, this individual might have been in a context where they were punished as they were coming through, and that it creates this unwillingness to take risks. Uh, um, so one of the first things in entrepreneurship, have any of you all done the fundamentals of entrepreneurship course? Show of hands again. Any of you all chose to
Yes,
do that?
oh,
Yeah. One of the things that, right, good. All right, Sydney. Tell me if this is something that Sydney you had happen to you. That they spoke about risk taking or risk aversion.
yes.
Yes? What did they mean by that?
Well, they spoke about gosh, I hope I put this correctly. When they were talking about risk taking and risk aversion, they were speaking about being willing to sacrifice and being willing to take a
Take a
chance
risk.
on something
Mm-hmm.
that you want. And how that as entrepreneurs, when you're leading to for a specific cause, you're gonna meet those moments where you're gonna have to walk through something blindly and just take a chance on what you want to fight for.
Right. Now, how many of us are going to suffer from that risk avoidance action? And that's something that is kind of all right. So let me couch this in a story I can tell. I know my mom, for example, was is to this day deathly afraid of us as children making decisions to open our own businesses and that kind of stuff because she always and a lot of parents come from this thing, get a job, study your work, get your qualifications and get a job, especially if you get a job with the government, then your life could be fixed, you could be safe. They avoided us ever taking risks to try something outside of the norms that they were familiar with. And that's the problem. We get taught risk aversion. All right. And that is one of the challenges that um, leaders and entrepreneurs, especially first time entrepreneurs, have to face. Take a chance and it might work, but you also run the risk of taking a chance and might fail. And um, being unwilling to take that chance means that you have this risk aversion, and you're waiting until all the elements fall perfectly into place before you do anything, and that creates a really difficult circumstance, if especially if it's an organization that you're operating with. All right. So it also means that you're not open to making errors and you're not taking chances, and that can be a very um, you know it's a very limiting type of stance to take. um, for example, for anybody here ever performed in public, in, like, let's say playing an instrument, or in any kind of public environment which you don't like? I mean, you probably um, don't like speaking in public. So how many people here aren't really good for um, public speaking? Don't like presentations? Anybody has that fear of presentations or don't like? All
Sure,
right.
I do. Well,
Okay.
not that I necessarily don't like it, but I get a lot of presentation anxiety.
Right. That's fine. And you know what happens though, Sydney, is that the more you do it, the better you become. And I'll be honest with you. You see that anxiety you feel?
Yes.
It never goes away. So as
Oh,
much as people will tell you, and it's important that it doesn't go away. You know why? Because if it doesn't go away, you'll become complacent as a presenter. You will not prepare well. You will not control your or modulate your voice properly. You follow me? There is a
yes, sir.
degree of anxiety that you must experience, regardless of if you are a seasoned presenter or a novice or beginner.
I understand, sir.
That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So you see that anxiety you feel, it's actually something you should harness, because it's something, it's a good indication that the exercise is still something that is exciting for you. But consider that that you never rose beyond the fear and did nothing. Follow me?
Yes. Yes,
Mm.
sir.
Because then now you'd never get beyond. It's sort of like um well, in Trinidad we have this really horrible thing that very few people actually know how to swim. Is that something anybody is familiar with here? They don't know how to swim, and but yet still we're surrounded by beaches.
That is unfortunately also me.
Right? Okay. Anybody else? Let's stop picking on Sydney here. Well, there's a Sydney Samsudar. What about you, Miss Samsudar?
No, sir.
Can you swim?
No, no.
Hmm. So that means that when you go to do you go to the beach,
Yes, but I just normally float in the waves. I don't really dive
right?
into the
Which means
water.
you bathe in the sand, right?
Yeah, you
Technically,
could
that's
say
what we
that.
all do. We bathe in the sand, yes. Okay, and
Yeah.
sunbathe and whatnot. But remember, this whole thing is based upon fear. Why don't we, attempt? Well, the beach is not a good place to learn to swim because most people have a tendency to swim outwards in the beach. But when you're swimming at a beach, you need to swim parallel to the shore because if you swim too far out, you can find yourselves in dangerous places. All right, and you get caught in undertows and whatnot. So and you also have to pay attention to what coast guards are telling you. Not just say coast guard, the lifeguards are telling you, and they always talk about not going beyond. Anybody knows how far up your legs they tell you in terms of depth of water when you walk out? Wow. Anybody here at all knows those rules? Those rules of thumb that you ought to use when you're at the beach? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, when you go to the beach, you're not supposed to go beyond water at your thigh level. The reason for that is that the tides are coming and going, or the waves are coming in and out. And when you're at thigh level, within seconds the water can rise beyond your head and then retract back down to your thigh level very, very quickly with the crashing of one wave. And of course, because we are unable to, or we are not familiar with what we ought to do, we panic and people get into difficulties, and that's all fear oriented. All right. Most people drown because they fight current. You're supposed to drift with the current and then you'll eventually come back in. But of course, telling somebody don't panic is like telling somebody you know, don't get scared. The more you say it, the worse it becomes. All right. Okay, so we spoke about the doing element and we keep on talking about this whole developmental process. So it means that, therefore, as a leader, we also need to be paying attention to learning. All right. We have to be ourselves open to learning. So to promote learning, these are the actions that as a leader you should be able um, to exhibit. You exhibit this willingness for the entire organization to learn through your own learning by helping others to learn. All right. So what you do is share the information that you have to empower other folks, and of course, creating a culture in the organization that helps to promote learning. So it's not something that is done behind closed doors. It's openly a process where everybody's engaging in learning, and this is something that um, I found very useful. I actually remember being in training sessions alongside the president of the college and my head of department. We're all in the classroom together, learning new skills, developing new teaching techniques, or looking at different philosophical, developmental elements of teaching and learning and that whole process. That is something that is encouraging because it means that if we are all collectively working together to learn new ideas, learn new concepts, it means when it comes to making changes to the program, making changes to what's happening in your classroom, that's something that we all are the same page because we all learnt things together and we all develop together. So it creates that learning environment. It's hard to think about a college, for example, not having a learning environment. We are a college of learning and we actually promote continuous learning, correct? All right. So there are some organizations, however, some leaders who don't promote this because they are fearful of looking unintelligent to their subordinates, and that's really a poor thing that we need to look at. So we're coming back onto this purpose or the function of the vision. So we said the relational leadership model is purposeful, it's purpose driven. So it gives you the the focus point of being able to say this is what we're working towards. We agree collectively that what we're working towards is something positive for everybody. Okay, not only towards the people who are directly involved in the organization, but even people or the environment we should talk about, as well as those peripheral to the organization. This is something um, that is important. If we feel a sense of pride in the goals of an organization, then we are more willing to put aside differences to work together meaningfully, as well as to want to share that goal with other people because we see it as meaningful and useful. If our goals are not necessarily positive but negative, then we're probably going to not want to share this with everybody around us. I don't want people knowing I'm working for this organization or any of your working environments like that where you're not happy with what you do. You're not proud of being a part of the organization. Unfortunately, I would hope everybody here is working for some organization or is looking at working in an organization that is, good for everybody. Anybody has an experience of working in an organization that you felt a little hesitant to say that you worked with them? No? Yes, Stefan? You can't just put up your hand and not say anything, Stefan.
So where I used to work before, it was a very toxic environment, and every time someone used to ask where do I work, I used to be hesitant to say I used to work for this company.
Okay, so do you mind sharing with us, um, not necessarily name any company, but the field that we're operating in?
They used to supply medical and hospital equipments for all the hospitals in Trinidad.
Uh-huh. And what was the problem that you were experiencing with them that made them feel icky for you?
So I was the only graphic designer and marketer at the time for them. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to deal with all the different divisions, creating marketing material for them, and it was very stressful on me to get
Okay.
everything done without any assistance.
All right. And that's probably because they didn't value the the work going into doing graphics.
I assume so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, that is something that I've noticed in firms that are market oriented, and of course, they're not going to want to put a lot of money investment into that. But if they were to get rid of you and had to employ a company, let's say, for example, they come to a media house and say, listen, we need a marketing package or program for this, they'll have to pay much more money to get that done, not so?
Yeah, correct.
For the other graphic artists, people who are here, this is one of the reasons why um, a lot of your graphic work is not, it's not going to be stuff you like. It's not going to be masterpieces of art and that kind of stuff. But it's going to be run of the mill, day to day labels and pictures and images that are designed to market goods around the world or um, services. Stuff you're going to find yourself saying, "Ugh, hate this." I can't tell you the amount of friends that I've had who worked as copywriters and graphic artists who eventually left the jobs. Even those that started their own companies stopped bothering with the field because they get what's the word, jaded about what's going on. Because in essence, you end up basically propagating. lies about products that are absolutely horrible, to try and make people buy it. You understand? Which is, which I keep having this argument with my colleagues in marketing. Marketing is making people buy things or want things that they don't need. Which any marketing people here? Any marketing specialists here? No. When for those of you who do principles of marketing and you meet your teachers, tell them Mr. Bisu said marketing is the worst subject in the world. And unfortunately, graphic artists tend to get pulled into that field because the visuals are always going to be an important element. All right. So if, however, we are in an organization that we feel, some level of pride with what the design was, what we were hoping to do, then you're gonna find that people are willing to work with you. There's a greater chance that we will be able to build this what we call shared vision. Now we're coming back to this whole thing about vision being developed. So the and we're going to come across the two types of vision: personalized visions and socialized visions. So actually, let's get into one time. So a personalized vision is where it is a vision of an individual within an organization or at the helm of an organization, and that personalized vision is then supplanted upon all of the individuals within the organization. So this is where we could equate this with um, what we called a person or position driven organization. The person who holds the post has the idea and has the vision of where they're going to go. This is limited in that nobody else can contribute to development of the idea. Nobody has any form of um, any contribution to its development, and therefore there's a limited amount of buy-in from those people around them, because they have little say in what's going on. The socialized vision, on the other hand, is a process where we collectively determine the vision and mission of the organization. Now, this area of vision and mission is critical in terms of helping to develop the initial thrust and drive of organizational development and group development. We understand that if we all collectively share a vision that we all find meaningful, we all find ethical in nature, and is good for everybody around us, including those people who are not directly involved in the process, we actually, want to share that particular type of thing, and we feel driven by that vision, as opposed to the personalized vision, which has a great tendency to be only based upon the needs and wants and the concepts of the one or smaller group of individuals that's personalized in nature. The socialized vision is what the leadership program is actually speaking to. When we speak about it being purposeful or being purpose driven. The purpose that we're talking about here is one that is vision that is built by collectivism. We are allowing other people to have input into the process. For those of you who are working, are you aware of a vision statement that governs the organization that you're working with? Anybody who's working and knows or is aware that your organization has a vision statement? No? Are you guys familiar with the vision statement of COSTAT, the organization that you're attending? You should see the vision and mission statements on all your course outlines for the courses that you're doing. Anybody? Wow. Interesting. All right. We'll see how that works out. right? So, in essence, when we talk about when we talk about relational leadership and purpose, we're really talking about a shared vision. So it's not one that a leader pulls together and then just pushes it out to everybody else. That's the nature of the purpose that of the organization that we're speaking about. And these days it's actually quite easy to be able to do that because we can get people to contribute to the development of ideas and development of vision statements. The problem with being more socialized in your vision drive is that there are two things we have to pay attention to, and the presentation actually speaks to it here. One, it takes a long time to be able to develop that common dream. It takes a lot of iterations of various statements, especially the vision statement and the mission statements, to encompass all of the things we are likely to want to try and get with each other. Secondly, when an organization sets up this vision and mission statements, people who come into the organization after that process has gone through have to be indoctrinated into that vision. And oftentimes that is a bit of a failing step. Um, and which is probably why for those of you working right now, you might not be aware that your organization has a vision or mission statement, or it wasn't emphasized. They just tell you, well, here, this is the vision and mission statement, and nobody kind of went through and indoctrinated you into why they have arrived at this position, why the goals of the organization are this way, and talk about the whole process probably of the socialization part. But it is something that good leaders and good organizations should do. Um, they should make that effort to be able to ensure that newcomers in an organization are also brought into the fold, so to speak, as part of the family who's moving this particular vision, moving them forward. All right. So, well, there's a lot about vision that you all are going to be dealing with in a couple of the other chapters, especially around strategic direction. There's a chapter from the DAF that speaks to it as well. For those of you who get engaged, one of the things when you get engaged in group activities, not necessarily in this class, always be remember of a couple of things. There are multiple visions or goals that you want to achieve in that group. The first one obviously is a good grade, but at if you look at it from the perspective of the teacher and the institution of COSTAT or whatever institution you're involved with, we are also looking at various learning outcomes for you getting involved in your group activity, which is again putting into practice the development of group work and putting into practice group learning. Because if a well-designed group activity means that the group is going to learn at multiple levels, different skills and different pieces of information will fall together. So um, remember that from different sides of the coin, you're going to be seeing things working slightly differently. All right. But again, one of the big responsibilities of an organization, especially of its foundation membership, is to ensure that that vision and mission statement is not just something that's on the wall, but it is something that is truly felt in the organization. All right, and I think in the college here, for example, it is difficult as we bring new students in to indoctrinate you guys into the vision and mission statement. It's a little more critical for the organization to indoctrinate the staff of the organization. Students really need just to be aware of the fact that it exists and its importance. And as we go through all these courses, you start to realize, okay, vision and mission statements are important. They speak to where we're going in the future. And of course, with time, over many years, vision and mission statements can change, but they generally tend to be more or less fixed over large spans of time because only when you achieve the vision is it done. So, but the journey that towards that vision sometimes is something that takes a pretty long time together. So we can move off of the. I think everybody's gotten the concept here that we're looking at positive change, and its function and role in the the relational leadership thing. It's the guiding principles or the guiding light to the organizational things. So one of the other things we have to talk about here is that oftentimes when we are making change, it means, sorry, when we are achieving a positive goal, it involves change. Now, change is a huge issue, especially in large organizations. So much so that we have the last chapter that is being presented is on managing change or leading change. Change is the biggest problem that most of us will face. Um, and the problem with change is that the only constant in life is change. The problems that we encounter with change is our unwillingness to disturb our settled state. We become accustomed to doing things in a particular way, and the older you are, the worse it becomes. Huh? Let's just remember ourselves that. As we get older, we get more comfortable with doing things in a particular way. You might experience this yourself, or you might experience this with older members of your family. They always like the thing this way. They want to eat over here. They don't like sitting there. You all understand what I'm talking about there. Anybody comes to mind when they talk about unwilling to change? If you take it from a personal perspective, anybody? Nobody. I'm going to start calling names now. Miss Simon? No, Miss Simon said I think she was at work. Let's call somebody. Anastasia.
Hi, sir.
Hi. Have you ever gone through a periods of intense change?
I guess.
Are
Yes.
you going through one now?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Uh huh. But are you familiar with the whole concept that as we get older, we tend to get more fixed in our ways?
Um,
Not by you, not by looking at yourself primarily, but by looking at other people around you.
I guess so.
Mhm. Can you give me an idea? Like, that, do you have, well, do you live with your parents and stuff?
Yeah.
Hmm. Do they like things in a particular way? Like things
Yeah,
done
they
in a,
do.
right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. We get fixed. Olivia, I see your hand up. You want to contribute?
Yes, I have recognized that even with myself, you do stuff, it works, you're comfortable, you get yourself into a routine and a pattern.
Right.
So when that change or when change presents itself, it's uncomfortable because now you have to probably reshuffle things, you have to,
Adjust.
go against what you are
Wanted.
accustomed to or comfortable with or prefer.
Hmm. Ah, very good. So you've kind of hit the nail on the head, both of you. The change, you, the only time we know change is coming is when it happens, and it's hard. And the reason why it's hard is because we have grown accustomed to doing things in a particular manner, and the something has caused us to have to make that change, which is what is referred to in the theory as a triggering event. So consider, for example, now prior to us having these online classes, um, I used to use a technique. I was one of the first lecturers to actually in the college to start using an e-classroom support structure my for my live classes. So I'll be teaching classes, but people would be able to download a lot of information off my e-classes. But I saw it as an eventual move. Think about what happened in the at the beginning of the pandemic and at the end of 2019, 2020. We had that situation where all of a sudden all our face-to-face classes had to come to a screeching halt. In fact, the semester was stopped. Mid-semester, we stopped. And we had to make an immediate conversion over to the e-classroom and start this online class. That's the triggering event. The pandemic caused the trigger, which meant for all of us who were accustomed to face-to-face classes, we had to we had to go through the process of changing everything, adjusting what we were doing, making significant changes in our approach to teaching to facilitate the transfer onto the online environment. That process is referred to as the unfreezing process. Engaging in the adjustment and switching over is the change aspect, and then of course, settling it down and so on is the refreezing process. Now, most modern theories tell us that we don't want to refreeze. What we prefer to do is actually to keep your situation in a more slushy type of environment. Why? Because we don't know what other changes are likely to come based upon what other stimulus comes up. So at the end of the pandemic situation, there was this firm belief that we will return back to our daily grind of hustling down the road at and spending 4 hours in traffic to drive down to a classroom, teach my classes, finish my classes at 8 at night, half 8 at night, then drive myself back down home to do the same thing, drive back up 5 o'clock in the morning, back and forth like a yo yo. All right. During the pandemic, we saw a different type of activity that we got up to. And I suspect it's the same sort of transitions that your predecessors also experienced, because most of you all here are unfamiliar with Costart operating on a face-to-face basis. All of you all here seem new enough as students to anybody here from that transition period. I'm making an assumption there, but anybody here in the college during that transition, or you all have joined the college after that transition? Seeing the lack of hands indicates that all of you all are relatively new students and only know the college after 2020. Miss Williams, yes, your hands up.
So I was in Custard in the days when there were face-to-face classes. Actually, well, I came back now to the online classes, which I find is super cool. But I was there when um
We used to do
we
the
had
face night
face-to-face
classes.
classes.
All
Yeah,
right,
night
you
classes
was you were at City Campus,
for the Spain, yes.
yeah. All right, so you had
Yeah.
to go through the struggle of finding parking at night and all kind of thing.
Well, at that time, we had this maxi that would pick us up and drop us to City Gate. So,
Right?
and
Yeah.
sometimes in the morning, you get the maxi that goes to Custard, and you go up to Custard, and in the night, you catch your maxi and you go to City Gate.
Yeah, well, you were
Yeah.
lucky that by that time we had actually purchased the buses for that, because before that time, it was a situation where you had to um, you had to find your own way back and forth. And think about those people who were driving, because it sounded like you were a full-time student. Talking about the
No, no, I
part-time.
was part-time. I
All
was
right,
part-time at that time.
right. So you know what and then struggling to get onto the elevator to get up to your class or walking up the
Oh,
steps. You
oh,
remember
okay,
all of
up the
that?
step. Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Right. And I was on fourth floor. I'd take the steps down to my class. Wouldn't bother with the elevator because you're wasting time waiting for that elevator. um, go into my class, set up, hook up my laptop, turn on the projectors and all that kind of stuff.
Projectors, yes.
And sometimes fighting up with a room to make sure you have a projector that's working in the room. All that kind of struggle. And the hard part was I would have been at work since 6 in the morning. I'm then teaching a class at 8. From 5 to 8. By the time I'm leaving, it's 9 o'clock, and then when I get home, I have to turn around and hit the road back at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning to get back down. When the pandemic hit and we stopped that traversing back and forth, I found myself with a lot more time to be able to focus on other things. And you know what my biggest problem was? My biggest problem was, when do I stop working? But then it still is a big challenge for me of determining that element. But I'm glad you were part of that, because you brought back some really, because I mean I did enjoy the teaching, even the face to face. But since then, nobody wants us to go back to that face to face situation because of the inherent ease that we experience now. Of course, there are some courses that still have to have face to face sessions because of the nature of the program or the nature of the training that's going on. So I know graphics, for example, you all have some practical elements that require some presence in the classroom. Is that correct? Graphic guys?
So far I've only had a single course that was in person, so the
Uh-huh.
rest was online.
Which one was that?
Introduction to photography.
Ah, that's actually a course I want to go and do. Um, been dying to do it. I just haven't been able to. I'm teaching on Saturdays most times. So I think that was when they classes tend to be on a Saturday.
Yes,
Who's the guy teaching it again? I can't remember his name. He has a African
I
name.
had it with Mr. Ranji Prasad.
Oh, that is a different guy. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, still a course I want to do myself. All right, but we understand this whole thing about change. Change is problematic. When we do have to engage in change, there's usually something that causes the change. In organizations, sometimes the change that we're making is towards a positive change, but the triggering factor is something that might be negative. So in your life, for example, um, things that might trigger change would be things like death, separation, um, loss of a job, something negative. And that negativity, we need to look at it as opportunities for us to move into something new. But it will be a hugely difficult task. And when we make those changes, we need to remember, don't get stuck in the process that you've now created, which is new. Remain open to change, and that is unfortunate, because as humans, we like regularity, and that creates that unwillingness to change it in a second time or third time, as the case might be. So it's one of the elements of change theory that has to be talked about across the board. All right, so we understand positive change towards this new vision statement is something that oftentimes happens within organizations. So in order to engage in that type of change, we have to remember to pay attention to why we're making the change, and trust that goal that we're working towards is something that we all agree is better for us to be in. Making sense? Um, the other issues with it is that change tends to be time consuming, and of course when the chapter is dealt with change management, you always see what's going on there as well, because the best way to go about that change is to make that change collectively as a group, seeing and buying into that whole process of of the whole change process being something that's good for everybody. And we have to also maintain that every time new people come into the organization, we have to indoctrinate them into why we're doing what we're doing. That's a really important part that human resource management in most companies tend to have to do, or it's one of the reasons why when you become a new employee in an organization, you're oftentimes mentored by a senior member of the staff that you're joining to be able to try and sell that. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but we'll see how it goes. So the next area of the relational leadership model we're looking at is the inclusive nature of the process. So we spoke about this as already. Being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, culture, and this will add different perspectives to your activities, to the group itself, to the organization. This is probably one of the more challenging areas that most individuals have, be the inclusive activity. Many leaders rise to positions of leadership based upon a value structure that speaks to similarity rather than diversity. And that diversity, when it presents itself to us, and it doesn't matter which it approaches, once we see difference, we become wary. And that wariness means that we sometimes shut the the diversity out of the organization. Now, this has become such a major problem that we can see around us. Because for those of you who may be paying attention to the U.S. Experience right now under the second Donald Trump regime, you'd recognize that there are lots of changes taking place in his administration that is actively engaging or putting barriers towards the diversity that we're speaking of here. So there's a lot of um, gay bashing. There's a lot of gender identity um, criticism going on, um, sexual orientation going on, and various cultural elements of their society that is being marginalized by the actions of senior government. And that is something that, as a leader, it sort of, we can safely say that the current president of the United States is not doesn't understand, well, not understand, but does not have inclusivity as part of the framework that he's utilizing in his governance structure. um, because I think well, not that I think, I knew that he utilized the Make America Great Again bandwagon to be able to rise to the situation. And that Make America Great Again deals with a lot of excluding other people. So it's Make America and Americans Great Again at the expense of everybody else. So we can see a really good example of how not to be inclusive taking place. So, how do we go about being inclusive? Um, so, we have to begin to talk about it from the perspective of first our mindset. We have to recognize, first and foremost, whether or not we have our own personal bias against individuals or against different groups. Do we treat people differently? Um, And if that's the case, we have to go through some serious soul searching as to why we might be doing something along those lines. Is it something that we've had before? It could have been something that was developed in our environment. It's something that we grew up with, being reinforced constantly. Now, this area here is kind of little. Um, what's the word? It's sensitive in nature, because a lot of what we've learned um, in life from our parents and from the environment we grew up in helps to create our unwillingness to be inclusive or unwillingness to even tolerate people from other views. So this is something that comes up in, if we look at Trinidadian society, and I think I hinted at this before in a previous system. There are large segments of our country that think only in the context of race, and here they talk about Indian versus African. In within that, you have other subsections of our society that has no tolerance to anybody who comes across as being gay, and how we have even less tolerance of anybody who may be transgendered. All those types of situations are created by an environment that reinforces those particular values, because we see those elements of society as being negative, as bringing our society down, as making, making our society, poorer or less because of it. This is something that it starts from our religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs across the board. Is reinforced by the society we live in, where we frown upon different types of activities, and it does not lend itself to us having an open mind towards individuals who are coming to us with these different situations or circumstances in life. Now, the further away from city centers you get, the larger these borders or barriers become. And therefore, as a leader, you need to know the context in which you're working. So, you'd have to take appropriate actions based upon what's happening. Okay. Now, one of the things that we have to understand about being inclusive and including these people from various walks of life or various points of view is that we need to understand that when we look at problems around us, the way in which those problems are addressed would be different based upon how we perceive the problem. So, somebody who has a different set of experiences and a different set of concepts and ideas will treat problems differently to the way I was brought up, as opposed to the way some of you may have been brought up. And as a leader, we need to encourage the multitude of perspectives to give us a almost like what we call a 360 view of a problem or situation facing us. The more perspective we have, the clearer the image of the issue will be. And it then would lead us to making better decisions. But more importantly, more inclusive decisions where we start to think about really important things that we couldn't think about before because simply did not see it from that perspective. So for example, I have had the opportunity to teach students who are blind in a primary. Understand this situation here. If you're teaching students who are blind, how do you go about teaching a course to them? Let's start from a face. Some of you all start thinking about it. You're teaching blind students in a class of sighted students. How do you teach them from a face-to-face approach? Anybody? Start thinking about if you had to teach somebody who is blind something that you normally do. Or will you just simply arrive at the situation because you're blind, you can't do this? I'm waiting for some responses, huh? Think and answer. Christian, let me hear what you would think. What field are you in again? Your graphics?
Yeah, graphic.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I mean, so it's uh it's not the entire class is blind. It's just you have some students who
I
are
have like
blind.
I have two students in my class who are blind.
Um, never really
And let's
thought
say
about
let's
that.
say you're teaching. Let me choose a course for you. Let's say you're teaching um, introduction to drawing.
Hmm. I mean, you're
Hmm.
definitely. I guess I don't. You would definitely have to structure it because it would only it would be based on just sound and touch,
Right.
and I guess how you actually I don't know.
I had anybody else wants to join in because this was probably one of the most eye-opening experiences I ever came across when it came to dealing with with disability issues or differently abled issues. Anybody else has had any sort of experience with working with people who are differently abled? That's the terminology they prefer to use, by the way. You know, one of the first things I had to do in my class, I was teaching two blind people. And interestingly, you know what the thing is? The two individuals who I was teaching was the CEO of the Blind Welfare Association and um, their secretary treasurer of the National Blind Welfare Association. They were in my class, and I was teaching them economics. And in microeconomics, there's a lot of graph work that we had to go through. And this, of course, was during the period of face-to-face classes. So how? No, the easy part would be um, they came with laptops that had what's the word I want to use? Reading aids with it, which meant that they could they could textbooks and stuff like that. They had the auto readers built in on it, so they could listen to the textbooks and stuff. But I'm teaching in class, and I'm drawing a diagram on the board, and I have to change. Now they are also recording the session, so I have to describe what I'm drawing. So I'm drawing a graph on the board to illustrate something. So I have to describe everything I do, word for word, stroke for stroke, based upon what I'm doing, and then reinforce that by coming back to them in a one-to-one session where um, I took, what was it we had used, boy? I'd used something called a pegboard. I had to go and invest in tools for teaching blind people on my own because the college didn't have these tools. And we used, they had these cane type of stuff that they use to make baskets. As the Blind Welfare Association, they do a lot of basket weaving. So that all these little canes. So we would sit together and create these graphical expressions utilizing the canes by outlining all of the lines and curves. So of course, I mean, it wasn't the perfect world, but I mean, it was a huge struggle. Just the way in which I spoke, um, um, the language used to teach these blind guys was really something else. And they were actually what I would say auditing the college for its ability to deal with differently abled individuals. And there were some teachers that absolutely did not want them in their class. All right. So understand what I'm talking about. This is the kind of effort you have to put in place for working with people and being inclusive with them. And it actually meant that what I used to do one-to-one tutorials with these guys. Fortunately, they had offices. I could go visit them in their office and do these sessions one-to-one with them. Even had to conduct parts of their exams individually with them as well, to facilitate their their unique perspective of things. And they also had very unique perspective of the world around them, given the situation that they were facing. And that is not something that, as a sighted person, we can't gauge the world from their perspective at all, unless you decide to do something really radical and try to live a day without sight. um, it was amazing. It was really, really amazing. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of, as a leader, those are the types of attitudes you need to develop towards the inclusion of other people around you. Because if you do, it enhances your own experiences. Trust me, you gain a lot from being inclusive of other people around you. So it's not only about sexual orientation and gender and issues, but simple things like trying to include people who are physically um, challenged in one area or the other. Another area is, and you all have an understanding of Asperger's. syndrome? Any of you guys? No? Okay. I don't know if I'm using the correct phrase. I think it's Asperger's syndrome. It's a type of situation where individuals are unable to use social filters, um, and simply just blurt out what's on their mind at any particular point in time. And I've had a number of students in class who have that syndrome and are unable to control their outbursts. Um, and that actually leads to some sort of, you have to be able to deal with it and manage it based
Sorry,
upon this.
sir. I don't mean
Go,
to interrupt you,
go
but
ahead.
are you
Yeah.
sure you're talking about Asperger's and not Tourette's? Because
No,
Asperger's is
not
a
not
form of autism,
right. So it's a form of
and
autism.
Tourette's is where you
Tourette's
can't
is no right.
control
Okay, so
your vocal
Tourette's is the one
speech
right.
sometimes.
Okay, so Tourette, not Tourette's, because this person has control over what they say, but they don't have the social um,
Oh, cues.
cues to know if they are too loud or the statement that they're
Yes.
making is rude, that kind of stuff. So they'll make
Yes.
statements like that, and therefore that's on the Asperger's, what they call is the spectrum. So they sit on that. So having to deal with somebody like that, that was a thing. I just remember this. I also had a student who had narcolepsy, and he would literally be asleep in the classroom, but be hearing everything you're doing. I've had opportunities to work with people who come, with a whole host of different things, and of course with narcolepsy, what happens? The more stress that they feel, the more incidents of narcolepsy that they experience. Huh? So this guy was so badly off in narcolepsy, he um, he had to give up his car. He couldn't drive anymore because he would fall asleep he will go into a narcoleptic situation while driving, and that obviously that's dangerous, right? All right. So yes, Sydney, it wasn't Tourette's. It was people with these social cues issues, individuals. They'd make these of the, and you see the thing about it too. You're teaching them in the context of a class of 30 other students who don't know, and they're just looking at the individuals. They're weird. Ms. Ramdani,
Yes,
you wanted to say something?
yeah. My one of my sisters, she teach.
Okay, I could barely hear you. Your volume is very low.
You hear me now?
A little better. I think you might need to move towards your microphone or increase the. Okay, we lost you now.
You
Not
hear me?
hearing it. Still very soft. But I'll try to hear. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a sister. She's a teacher
Uh-huh.
and she works with special needs children.
That's it. Yes.
And sometimes I would hear the daily issues that she would face. And as you were talking, I remember one time, um, one of the children, he would go up very close to the other children, and she sat there and she observed what was taking place. And what we would quote the normal child, he would back away, and the
Hmm.
child on the spectrum would come up very close. So he couldn't read that, no matter how many times the child back away, it means, you know, stay apart, don't come, very close to me. And after she told the child, use your hand as a measuring, arm's length
Hmm.
when you speak with someone. And he did that eventually. And another student said, "Why you doing that? Every time you come to us, why you keep putting your hand towards us?" And he said, "Oh, I would be too close and I would be up in your face. So Miss told me to do this. So sometimes they pick up on it and eventually they would be
They will
aware.
understand. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's true because children are more resilient than adults actually. But consider if he's in a different environment and he's getting close to somebody, other people don't understand what's happening, might lash out at him and hit him or her, as the case might be. You follow? Um, and that's the problem with that particular issue. They simply don't know the social cues, or are not governed by those social cues, and they say what they say or they do what they do, and unless we are paying attention and we are understanding of these things, because that's the most important element. To be inclusive means we have to understand their position and their point of view. We're not saying that you have to go and do what they do, but you need to understand why they're coming from that perspective, but also respect the fact that they're also viewing the world from that perspective, and it it indicates a different set of perceptions that will make it easier for us to see them from that point of view. All right. Now, there's a lot for us to do here, and I know this is taking some time. So I'm kind of probably going to have to breeze through some of these areas. All right. So here again, at the end of the day, when we speak about inclusivity, we're talking about being willing to to facilitate the ideas, concepts, and perceptions of people from a varying types of circumstances, backgrounds, and that type of stuff. Because what they bring to us is not going to hurt us. It is simply going to improve our ability to see things from their perspectives. But we have to be willing to listen, and not only willing to listen from our own frame of reference, because then that becomes a situation that governs everything. So the entire organization will be built based upon only the broad perspective of one key group, or what we call the dominant culture in the organization. We need to be paying attention to the minorities in our groupings and our society, because especially if we want to be inclusive to everybody, our organization can find itself, just locking everybody else out, or serious large segments of the society. Consider, for example, the amount of buildings in the country around, um, in the country that are wheelchair friendly, and it's really, I mean, you probably wouldn't know, but walk into any place of business, or and this is both government business as well as private sector business, and pay attention to, if somebody came in the store in a wheelchair, could they move around, could they shop, could they access the services? Look at it from that perspective and start to understand, if you're sitting in a chair, or you are put into a chair because of an accident or something like that, how the world will change, um, based upon your sudden loss of a particular ability. All right. So, and this could happen in the blink of an eye in some instances. Huh? All right. We also have to pay attention to the language of inclusivity. So this is where we need to engage in evaluating our own conversations. Are we always using I and me, or are we being open ended in our approach by utilizing more we, or will we be able to do this, or will, as opposed to the excluding everybody else. um, I decided to do this and decided to do that. I mean, a lot of you, for example, would have come across those kind of situations where people aren't being very open to other people's positions and points of views. All right. consensus building is going to be a very important part of being inclusive as well. It's actually inclusivity is one of the elements that is important in group work and group development. So I can't wait until the class goes through or the group goes through groups and teams. So hopefully you all might be able to utilize some of that in your own group work that comes up next or comes later on. All right. Now, when we talk about being inclusive, we're not only speaking to those people within the organization, but also outside and peripheral to the organization. Here we're talking about stakeholders and individuals who are impacted by and have a stake in what we're doing with our organization. So, take for example, if you're in a church group, a youth group within a church, um, one of the stakeholders will be the church itself, and in terms of what the youth group is doing, because remember you all are an extension to the activities, and then the society around the church, the environment around the church, has a stake on what you're doing, because maybe you all are practicing choir practice and that kind of stuff, or maybe making noise and disturbing people. You understand, making a whole heap of noise in different times of the day or on the weekends or whatnot when you're doing rehearsal. So you have to think about um, you have to broaden your perception of inclusivity, to be inclusive in all things that you're doing, beyond just those people within the organization, but those that are peripheral to the organization as well. Those are really important, that we have to pay attention to those things across the board. So I think you've gotten the whole concept of this. This is the um, graphical representation of response to stakeholders outside and inside the organization, around the institution. So you have perspectives or stand on the issue and degree of importance to the stakeholders. So you're measuring on one axis here, how important or not important is this thing to us, to the shareholders, as opposed to their perspective on the issue, whether or not it is high or low. And you utilize this to evaluate, um, how to treat with people who are antagonistic as opposed to supportive and that kind of stuff. The idea is that you need to be aware that your stakeholders can fall into all four of these categories, and they can create some degree of difficulty for you. So when you're making decisions, you have to start thinking about them from that perspective as well. All right, now when we talk about the next one, we talk about empowerment. So when we speak about empowerment, we're speaking about two dimensions of empowerment. One, the sense of empowerment that an individual feels and can act on, and secondly, the environment that we create within the organization that promotes empowering other individuals in the organization. That those are going to be the two elements of empowerment that we speak about. Encouraging individuals to welcome back, Mr. Hart. All right, empowering individuals to want to take ownership. So this is something that is kind of a personal level. We have to believe that, as a leader, I need to encourage the people within my organization to feel as if they are important, and that they are quite willing to make decisions within the organization, to take charge of certain things. It means that, if any sort of barriers to that thinking exist, as the leader, it's your responsibility to sort of level those barriers to it, because you want to have, now again, it's a double-edged sword here, because the relational leadership model is saying that we want these types of individuals as members of our organization. Traditional leadership models or traditional leadership thinking does not encourage some of these types of activities. Hi, Miss Greaves. Jamel, sorry, welcome.
Hi, sir.
Hi,
I now
welcome.
got in.
You know,
I've
got
been
it.
trying almost an hour now.
Did you put anything in the chat? Um, Yeah, you could have communicated us with the chat, and I would have been able to see if you were having trouble. What did you have to do to get in?
It kept saying update
Oh, okay.
teams need updating.
Well, did you eventually update the teams and got in?
Mm, I tried with the link that you sent and
No,
then
no,
the
you can't
one
update. You can't update Teams. All right, so Teams recently released an update that if you didn't do, you'd have to um, do the update, or else it would not have connected to the class.
well, I didn't do anything. I just came back out and waited and I tried back and I'm in now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would encourage you, however, to do the update
Okay, no
at some
problem.
point. Then. Are you on your phone or are you on your PC?
On laptop.
Okay. All right. So the app probably needs to be updated because I had to do some updates over the weekend for Teams, both on my phone and on my PC. All right.
Okay.
Okay. But I'm
Yeah.
glad you're here there.
Yes.
Okay. So we're talking about empowerment here. So we want to encourage people to have this higher sense of empowerment within the organization. Traditional leaders don't like this because when people feel empowered, they can challenge a leader. And therefore, those particular types of traditional leaders will tend to put barriers in place to prevent the development of too much empowerment. There's a certain amount of empowerment that they will encourage, then past that they'll say no, 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 you need to know your place, stay in your lane kind of behavior. In the relational leadership model, we want full empowerment and we want to dismantle any barriers to that particular type of um, to that particular action. Why? Why do we want to have empowered followers? Because two things. One, empowered followers means that you will have a more powerful organization because you're giving these people the power to act on your behalf. Secondly, you're preparing for your next line or your next generation of leadership within the organization. All right, for succession planning. At the end of the day, when the relational leadership process involves this empowerment, it is designed around this particular concept. Make sure that the people within your organization can stand on their own and they feel empowered towards doing the right things towards accomplishing the goals of the organization. Secondly, you as the leader need to make sure that you mitigate against all of the possible barriers that exist within the organization that would prevent that from happening. So you have to encourage and improve the situation there for that. All right. Um, it implies that these empowering environments are learning environments. So again, you have to encourage that, and you have to be willing to let people um, in the process of empowering them make mistakes. If you don't allow for mistake making, then that creates a barrier because then nobody's going to want to take on the initiative to do certain things without um, without making sure that they're not going to fail. So that kind of diminishes the empowerment that you're trying to provide across the board. So they speak here about the root word of empowerment coming from power. Um, there's a group here that's going to do power and influence, so you're going to cover this in more detail than I will here. But they talk about where does power come from. Um, so power is generally either power over, power with, or power alongside. So when we talk about the different types of powers that exist, all right. Let me make sure that we cover everything here. Um, all right. So where do people get sources of power? The group will present this, but just to indicate the social power here: expert, referent, legitimate, coercive, and reward power. Those are the sources of power that exist in organizations, and each one expert power kind of makes sense. You're the expert, so therefore people give you power or assign power to you because you have this knowledge, this well of knowledge that gives you that referent power. This is based upon the personality of the individual. They're able to because of maybe length of tenure or a combination of their expertise and experiences, people go to this person sort of like the guru in the organization, sort of thing. Legitimate power is the power ascribed to you by the position that you hold within the organization. This power is considered to be fragile because although you have the legitimate power to do this, if you use that power to punish people, it can backfire very quickly because legitimate power is in itself quite fragile. Coercive power and so there are two, coercive and reward. They're both two sides of the same coin. Coercive means that you can punish people or remove any sort of benefits that you earn, bonuses and so on. And that power is relatively to punish people in order to make sure that they do what you want. Reward power is the opposite side of that, where you reward people based upon their ability to deliver on the outcomes of the organization. So you could give raises, you could give plaques or privilege to that particular individual, or you can just simply express support and praise. So sometimes those are the different types of reward power that they talk about. As I said, there are some. There's a chapter on power and influence that will go through that in a lot more detail that I need to at this point in time. So when we speak about sources of power, sometimes we also have the unintentional power, which is somebody may ascribe power to you inadvertently because they perceive you to be an expert, which may not be correct. So, for example, the example that they gave in the case here is consider, for example, you are in a group, and in the group you have a communications major, and you therefore ascribe to that person, hey, you'll do all the editing and checking of the assignment or the group project, because you have ascribed to that person the power of being an expert in language and language usage simply because they're doing a communication program, which may not in fact be true. So unintentionally you're giving somebody, and we tend to do that, sort of give away our power that way, or give people power. Especially sometimes we give power because we are afraid that what we're thinking is wrong, because there's a so-called expert in the room. It doesn't mean that what you're thinking or feeling is wrong, but it's a different perspective on something, and you ought not to feel um, that you need to deny that particular expression of or idea because you don't think you have the power. All right, so that's something you have to pay attention to as well. Leaders have to pay attention to that as in that type of things. Um, so how you use your language is also going to be important in terms of determining whether or not Ms. Gatsby, welcome. Um, as you're here, Ms. Gatsby, welcome aboard. Let me just ask you a question just for clarification. You and Greaves, how are things coming along for presentation two? Okay, I could barely make you out. You're kind of distorting a bit. Try that again. Okay, I mean next week is when it's due, so but everybody's pulling their weight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So let me know if there are any issues, huh? Please. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So continuing along with empowerment elements, so we kind of have to work through this. This is what I was talking about. Inadvertently giving power to people because we make assumptions about them. That's something that we have to pay attention to that we don't do unnecessarily. Um, Common elements that the old paradigms used to look at is that um, power is a zero sum game, meaning that you either have power or you don't have any. Power is not finite. It in the relational leadership model, the view of power is that something should be shared. Everybody should be able to access power and be given power. The older or traditional approaches to leadership is that the leader must hold on to all the power for all it's worth and avoid giving power or sharing power with other people because it makes them appear weak. And that is a negative that we want to try and move away from. To empower others, it means you must share power. You must give up power to be powerful. There's a phrase that comes to that: stoop to lead. I don't know if any of you will understand what that. Stoop to lead. Look it up if you. It's a kind of like an old wives saying. In order to lead people, you need to stoop to their level. Okay. Um, so I think we can move beyond power. See if there's anything major that we need to talk about. Uh, right, we talk about here the abuse of power. Um, Unfortunately, when people do abuse power, it causes barriers to exist within organizations. So the relational leadership model is saying you need to be careful with how you use power. You need to be willing to share that power, but you also have to take the responsibility if things go wrong. All right, hoarding power. Those are the kind of behaviors that you see people get involved with sometimes, especially those that come from a traditional concept of how leadership works and all power resides with the leader and so on. That's sort of like the sort of dictatorial approach to things. And of course, we then have the element of self empowerment, and this is where people take it upon themselves to be able to want to um, take up their right place in an organization. So you want to encourage self empowerment by, of course, setting up the environment to allow for it, being forgiving to the mistakes that are likely to be made, but more importantly, encouraging that level of self confidence in your followers to be able to engage in taking initiative and doing things in the organization and not sort of, what you would want to do, ridiculing them. So, how does self empowerment take place? There's the process, of course, of educating yourself and accessing training, leading others into those situations of, leading the way kind of thing, structuring the organization and structuring your time to be able to, set aside time. Okay, so set aside time for some learning here, set aside time for some work with other people, and so on. Providing opportunities and making sure that people in the organization as a leader have the resources necessary to do their job. Mentoring people, though might come across new people in the organization, as we talked about before. As they are new and coming in, you mentor them to help to develop their sense of empowerment within the organization, and of course, actualization, which is being empowered and actually behaving in that manner across the board, both as an example from the leader perspective as well as from the followers as well. All right, so far so good. Everybody's following this empowerment element. Now, empowerment is really important because of the next two things: mattering and marginality. We need to be aware of where people are in our organization when it, especially as it relates to empowerment. We need to make sure that everybody in the organization feels as if they matter. That's what mattering is referring to. That their actions, their decisions, their positions, their point of view matter to the organization, despite where they are in the organization. Now, this is something that we can see. I often see, I should say, I can't say we can. I often see that a lot of people look upon the lower elements of employees within an organization and perceive them as being that they don't matter in the organization. In particular, I've seen this behavior in relation to custodial staff who look after the building, clean the bathrooms, that type of stuff. A lot of people, and in fact, what happens is that as a result of the way they're treated by other members of staff and sometimes leadership themselves, they feel as if they don't matter and they don't last very long in the organization because they don't feel appreciated. It's critical. If you think about it, if you don't have somebody in your office whose job it is to look after the bathroom and clean up the environment, pretty soon your organization will be a filthy place to go and work in, because nobody's going to willingly take upon that responsibility. When we treat people as if they don't matter, that's what we do. We make them feel as if they're not important, and that is going to be problematic. You need to ensure that everybody in your organization feels as if they matter. All right, and the reality is not only they must feel that that's the case, but it should be pointed out that they do matter because their effort, their job, or whatever they do in the organization is critical to the success of moving towards the goal that we've identified. All right, margin means the same thing. If we make people feel matter, that their position and their actions and their attitudes matter, then they're not going to feel marginalized. All right, and therefore you want to pay attention to whether or not behaviors that you're exhibiting, both from a power base or from your language, is making people feel marginalized. Oftentimes, um, teachers are oftentimes charged with making other people in their classroom situation feel marginalized. It is something that oftentimes you inadvertently do. So you have to pay attention to whether or not, um, if you are the leader of an organization, that you don't marginalize people within it. And again, I bring up the example of janitorial staff or custodial staff in an organization. Oftentimes, those people at that lower end of the spectrum in the organization are, are treated with scorn, in fact. And if you really think about it, those individuals make our lives much easier because we're focused on other activities and they are making sure that our basic needs are being sorted out. How can they not matter? You understand? And being scornful towards them is really something that, unfortunately, a lot of senior staff tends to behave in that manner. And it's always embarrassing to see it happens, and I don't know if anybody will do this. It happens a lot with female staff members. I find they are scornful towards um, people who are in the custodial activities of the organization. I don't know why. Um, I don't know. They don't clean their own bathrooms and stuff at home. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Would any of you all agree with that, or have you ever seen that in action or take place around you? Nobody? Well, glad to you.
Yes,
You
sir.
yes? Can you give me a for instance? Jamel?
Just from observing when you go to certain places how they are treated.
Uh-huh. Another group of individuals falls into that is security. Again, they're at the extreme ends of the organization, and people treat them with scant regard and dismissive of them. So this concept of mattering and marginalization is something that we have to pay as leaders understand that is a power play because you're belittling people within your organization. You're not empowering them. All right. If you have people who are empowered, they're not going to wait to be told to do things. They're going to do it because they see it. All right. And they have a sense of initiative in terms of it. All right, so we talked about the need to develop the empowering environment. So it means that we have to promote that whole concept and take away those barriers. We have to be able to tolerate the issue of if somebody takes a chance and does something that they make a mistake. So it can't be a zero sum. You make a mistake, you go on. That type of behavior will not encourage people willing to take chances in the organization and do things. All right, to create initiative. Those are the kind of things that we want to be able to do. So I think we can move through this here. Organizational dynamics, of course, that is the environment that we talk about you're creating. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, their culture does not encourage environmental empowerment because they come from very traditional systems that discourage that. You see that with the public sector, for example. Public sector is very linear in its organization. Authorization has to be sought for everything. Nobody can take the initiative and do nothing, because if you do, then you get blamed for it, and you know that you have usurped the powers that be, and it's a whole nonsensical kind of thing. But that organization culture stamps creativity, it stamps out empowerment, it stamps out initiative, and that's not what you want in this model. That's not what we're looking for. All right. Empowerment and delegation. They warn you here that empowerment is not the same as delegation, because delegation is giving somebody the work to do, but not necessarily the power to actually act upon it. And that's a kind of setup situation, because you're telling somebody you need to do this work and get it done for the next meeting. And come around next meeting, you find that whatever work you've done, your boss um, um, takes the rewards for it, or the acknowledgement of getting that job done, and you are left with all of the hard work and victimization that may have gone along with it. Further, if you don't get it done, the boss will turn around and say, well, this person is to be blamed for this because they didn't get it done. And as I've seen people um, utilize that process of delegation to actually set people up because they perceive that individual as a threat to them in the position that they're working in. So that's something you want to pay attention to and not get into that behavior. All right. Okay, so let's move through and we get to ethical. And of course, the main overpowering thing in the ethical part of the model is that ethical, the relational leadership model, sits upon the concept that everything is driven by us being moral in nature, by us having high standards, ethical standards of behavior. Now, again, this is in particular becoming very important in leadership models because of our historic um, failures in the past. And I see we haven't learned yet. We're still behaving where the key goal of the organization is achieving highest profit levels at whatever cost. We're still behaving where um, greed is good. You know, we're still behaving from those things. We're still marginalizing anybody who comes across with environmental concerns and that type of stuff. So again, the reason why the relational leadership model is based upon ethical standards is because we've had too much happen in the past that indicates that we are being too flexible with our ethical values. The issue with ethics, however, is that having an ethical standard can also make us blind to other possibilities. So there's a problem that we have to look at there. So here in this part here, we talk about the origins of the word ethics and morality. Um, so the ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rule of concerning what is right and wrong. Comes from the Greek word for character and sentiment of the society. Being ethical means conforming to standards of a given professional group. So, for those of you who are radiologists, for example, and even graphic artists and so on, there are certain ethical standards that your profession will bring to bear on your behavior. those professions of, like for instance, the graphic work and stuff like that. They'll talk about the ethics of copyright infringement. You also have the confidentiality issues. In radiology, it's going to be about practicing patient confidentiality is going to be an issue. The HEPA oath of do no harm, that type of stuff. All those types of things across the board impact upon the relational leadership model, deciding upon making sure that we are behaving in an ethical manner. All right. Now, the words ethics and morals tend to be utilized interchangeably. So we behave in a moral environment. And these are all core values that we're going to be looking at throughout the development of the model. So all of our decisions, all of our work, all of our actions are going to be housed or dealt with in an ethical standard. Now, two presentations will tackle this in a lot more detail. That'll be, let me just bring it up here so you'll see it. We have chapter 6, presentation 3 by Dan Raj Cox and Philip Rowland. How is that coming along? Um, I know it's after Carnival, integrity and moral purpose. How's that coming along, guys? Miss Phillips, you're here. Olivia. All right, maybe they're not here. And then we have an alternative view of the same or similar concept from the DAF text, Courage and Moral Leadership. So we're going to see that from Alim, Kiana, and Christian. How's that coming along? You guys getting together with that? That's way down on March 17th, so you have some time. All right. So y'all are going to be engaging in this aspect of the relational leadership model in a lot more detail because it is such a cornerstone element of the the model itself. So always going to be looking at what's wrong and right, and obviously all of the behaviors of the leader in the organization will be based upon those values. That's why leadership is values driven. The values that they're speaking about, of course, here is those that are ethical and moral in nature. All right. All right. So we can move through this area. I think people get the general idea of what it is. Of course, our values system has to be consistent across the board and congruent. It means that you can't be in your private life doing one thing and in your public life you're doing something else. Across the board, all leaders have to have that consistent. Now, the thing about it though is one of the criticisms of this model is also that it's rather difficult to maintain such high values in all aspects of your life and stuff. But it is, as I said before, models are exactly that. They are models to which we aspire to. That's why this is referred to as an aspirational model that we could try to move towards because it speaks to better type of behavior and better type of leadership that goes around. Um, Consider again the kind of leadership that we have here in Trinidad and the United States and around the world. Do they reek of ethical and moral values, or do they reek of negative values across the board? How do you all feel about it? Mr. Augustine, Chrisan, how you feel about leaders in Trinidad? Do they exhibit any sort of moral standards that you approve of? Chris?
Um, hmm. So that's a sensitive topic, especially if I think in politics when we say
That's
leaders.
what I'm talking about, yes. When we look at our
Um,
politicians around us, do you feel as if they are highly ethical and moral?
to be
What's your
honest
gut
with
feeling?
you, mm,
Forget about being politically safe. Do you,
okay.
yeah?
I think it may have certain ministers that I might agree with, and then some I just may not.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're not talking
Wow.
about agreeing with them, because somebody could be ethical, but you don't have to agree with them. All right. Yeah, remember, there's a difference, huh? It's not things we like, but it's the behaviors that we're looking at.
Okay, okay.
You follow me? So be careful. It's not about what we think we like, but those that are consistent in their behavior, and ethical in their behavior. That's something. It's not a matter of what we like or what we don't like. But for me, and here I'm talking about looking at the behaviors of individuals in public life around us here, a lot of them fall short of any sort of ethical values. But they will tell you otherwise. But their behavior tells us something else. And the situation is what they say and what they do are two different things altogether. In fact, that's one of the areas that we come across here. We find that all the time. If you know, if you look at their behavior critically, you're gonna see these massive variations between what they do and what they say, and it is so. The thing about it is that we've come to almost accept that if you get into politics, you will engage in some kind of corruption. You'll get kickbacks. It's expected that that's how things is be. You follow? And that's not how the world's supposed to be, you understand? But I mean, if you go anywhere around the world, everybody tells you, well, you want to get something done, well, yeah, that past change. Anything in and people say that about Trinidad all the time. You want to get something done, license office, find somebody you know and pass some money. Or find somebody you know who will help you. What does that speak of? Any public institution you go to is you get that same kind of talk going on across the board. That same sort of treatment that we see across the board. That didn't come in isolation, That is a that is a what's the word I want to use? That is an element that is encouraged within the organization or develops because of a breakdown of ethical values throughout the organization. Here we're talking about the public sector of Trinidad and Tobago, all right? And it's coming from top down. As the old people would say, fish is rotten from the head first. You all know about that, right? Yes? All right, guys. So let's
Yes.
move. Yeah? Okay, cool. So the last element I want to talk about here is the element of because there's a whole set of stuff here that we want to talk about, but I'll leave it for the other teams to treat with, leading by example, is the process oriented. What does that mean? Process oriented really refers about trying to do things in a process manner. It's a manner in which it is repeatable all the time and is measurable. That's the next part of it. That the process is one in which we can engage in it numerous times and we can measure the outcomes. The the relational leadership process, this whole thing that we're looking at here, is one that all elements are process oriented. So if they are process oriented, it means we are always going through the process of practicing being making sure my purpose is something that is constantly being updated. Not, well, I should say constantly updated, but is constantly being refreshed among the people within my organization. We are being inclusive in our behavior. We are encouraging empowerment from the people and setting up empowering environments, and that everything is couched within high ethical values. That everything being process oriented means that we can then ensure that we every time we run the process over and over again, we are able to improve what is going on. So, and I keep on doing this circular thing, but it's more of a spiraling thing that we're looking at. Every time we run the process, it means that we can get better at what we're doing. All right. Every time sort of like for those of you who have fears of public speaking, every time you engage in a public speaking process, you become better and better at it. Though we did say the fear factor is not something that's likely to change. you simply get a little more comfortable, but that fear factor will never change because you need to have a little bit of fear, that anxiety. I wouldn't say fear, but anxiety. The challenge is to manage the anxiety for towards your advantage. All right. So again, everything in the process, in the relational leadership model, is process oriented, so that we can um, improve constantly and make changes intentionally throughout it. Because every time we go through the process, we have to evaluate, we have to reflect on what took place in the past, make sure we're doing the right things, because we don't expect that we will arrive at a great organization overnight. You don't land perfect. We arrive at perfection, or we arrive at some level of efficiency over time, and that over time requires that we implement ethical and inclusive empowering processes that further share the purpose of the organization, and we keep on doing this over and over again, so that we are able to build a better organization, a better foundation, and we prepare the next generation of leaders coming to be even better at this process. So we are spiraling outwards every time we go through the processes that we are engaging in to make this organization across the board. So this is primarily what we're talking about when we say that the relational leadership model is process oriented. It means that we are able to perform these things over again, get measure our outcomes, and improve the organization every time we go through processes. If it wasn't process oriented, it meant that we would set up standards, we would set the goals, and we will, say, okay, these are our values, and then left it like that, and just go about the thing without measuring, are we meeting these values? Is our goals being achieved? Are my behaviors inclusive? Is the organization exhibiting the types of things that we wanted to do? And that means there's a whole set of things that we have to be process oriented. The same thing about meaning making. If you're involved with an organization and it doesn't mean anything to you, um, you know, or more importantly, it doesn't mean anything to anybody else, then why are you involved with it? All right. So meaning making is twofold in nature. It must mean something to you. It must be something from your heart that you're getting involved with, and it must mean something to other people. All right. Or else you're not going to invest the time and energy into the development of that. All right. It also requires in the process that we reflect on what we're doing as well, because that's one of the processes we have to get involved with, that we oftentimes think about why we're doing what we're doing and how can we do it better. To do that, we must spend time doing reflection. um, we have to reflect on all aspects, so we also need to encourage collaboration and cooperation. Most people speak to competition supposedly being the superior competitive nature within the organization. So you might go into a graphics organization and say, okay, run another competition to see who could come up with the best concept for this particular vendor that we have in terms of this thing. That's that actually research has indicated that cooperation is superior to competition. If we get together with different perspectives, different approaches, and we learn the process of effectively working together, because that is the biggest challenge. Working together requires us being open, being accepting, empowering others, being ethical in our stance, so that we could get together and produce the better results. That is the thing that we have to pay attention to. So promoting competition, far too long we've always positioned, even in education, competition as being the way to establish the highest performances. But the reality is that that is not true. Cooperative and collaborative approaches have caused us is much superior to that particular situation. So, but we still have this belief that competition allows what's it, cream rises to the top. There is no there is no research that supports that behavior. By just saying, huh? Just saying. Um, but cooperative and collaboration is what will require us to give to create the best for not for any one individual, but create the best for everybody across the board. All right, and it helps to develop a better teamwork, better collectivism, working together. But the word collectivism and cooperation and collective tends to you know create some negative feelings from people who prefer individualistic um, types of actions or activities. So that is something that the relational leadership process is also going to encourage, that we work on that element of cooperation that we're going to be dealing with in a lot of aspects. Meaning making, we spoke about that, both it must mean something to us here and must mean something to us here. It um, it it is important that at the end of the day, when we get involved with an organization, it is something that we mentally think is useful, and we feel our spirit is attached to it. Um, that's something that's really important, because it was one of the reasons why I retired from Ministry of Education and came across the Costa, is because I thought it was a better idea, cognitively speaking, and my heart is in teaching, and I wanted to be part of the process of moving college forward. Um, and that is something that, as you all are growing and developing and joining your first sets of organizations, you will want, let's say, for the couple of people who've already identified they want to set up their own businesses. You have to think about, in setting up my business, how is it different to all the other businesses in that field? And how would I attract the kind of people that I would like to have around me that would, add value? This is it. This is one of the things. You have to attract those people around you who the idea of setting up your own business and creating a company appeals to them from a cognitive point of view or from a logic point of view, but also they feel some sort of personal connection to it, some emotional connection. Those are the individuals you want within your organization to work towards that. So it must mean something to these individuals at both levels. Okay. All right. So we talk about, this is how things become, meaning making and stuff like that. So I think I've gotten that concept a little bit done there. We should be okay. All right. One of the other things that we have to talk about is reflection and contemplation. The process requires a lot of that reflection and contemplation as part of the process of us um, broadening that spiral. Because only if we take time, evaluate what took place in our past actions, and seeing where that is likely to help us to improve things in moving forward. Now, we tend to, when we do reflection and contemplation, we tend to think about the failures primarily, but we also have to pay attention to the positives, because we want to repeat that. So we want those actions to be repeatable. And the only way they can be repeatable is if we truly understand what we're doing. It can't be a one and done deal. It's something that has to become repeatable over time. All right. So this is a problem, however, because the speed at which business operates, it doesn't allow for meaningful reflection and contemplation. But as a leader, you need to set aside time to do that reflection and contemplation generally, and it should be reflection and contemplation as a group, because you have to remember, even though you're the leader of an organization, it is important that we spend time looking back collectively at what we've done to ensure that when we move forward, we don't repeat errors that were made before, and we ensure that what we got right is something that continues moving forward. That makes sense, guys? Yes? but it will require organizations to and even individuals to engage in something that is inherently a little difficult across the board. All right, so there's a whole set of stuff here, but that's the important thing about it. All right, so um, cognitive. Remember that. All right, so again, we've covered the key areas, and the key areas that we want to look at really is the entire model itself. Let me just get back to one of the this model here. So we've looked at this relational leadership model, and we've looked at all of the elements that make up the model. Um, you all will then, in the chapters to follow from next week onwards, will pull apart different elements and develop them further. So, in essence, the entire model is this. The presentations that are to follow will focus on elements of each of these um, parts to be able to bring it to the whole. Now I'm looking at the time and I'm 5 to 2, and there is a little video clip that I'm going to post into um, I'm going to post into the this here. I'm going to post this into the WhatsApp chat group, and you'll look at this on your own. It's a review video of what we just looked at. All right. Um, in terms of the relational leadership model. So I want you all to, take some time and view it. And all right, let's post that there. This is the RLM model review. And they would talk about what it's all about, the same things we just looked at, as well as some of um, what's the word I want to use? Some of the criticisms of the theory. And of course, one of the main criticisms of the theory is that it's aspirational in nature and sometimes seen as being rather um, idealistic. But again, as we said, most of these things are set up as ideals simply to allow us to be able to engage in a form of determining the gaps between the reality that we face. Make sense so far? All right. Anybody has any questions that they want to ask for clarification? Um, Anybody? No? All right. I'm trying not to keep you all later than 2 o'clock. All right. So with that being said, if there are no questions, let me stop the recording and thank you all for being here today.